questions.
Ask you one
Don't do that.
question, because
I don't want to answer your questions.
exactly.
I stated
Yeah,
what I
that's what I
believe,
thought.
like men do, right?
Oh,
I said
men
I'm a grown
do,
man,
like,
and I have this,
question.
and I have this idea,
Yeah.
Come on,
and then a gnat flies into my ankles and starts talking to me.
She's actually giving you an honest question here. Like, you can say you don't know if God exists or not. However,
I already did.
yeah, but on the belief side, do you believe a God exists? Yes or no?
I have no active belief that a God exists. I hold the possibility that one could.
Do you understand the problem with that or not? Okay, that's why I asked you the question, right? You could be open to the possibility it'll explode, right? But it's a tiny possibility, right? It's just
That's right.
logically whole. You're not infallible. It could happen, but you would probably be incredibly confident that's not going to happen. And I'm curious if that's your level of confidence on God.
I don't know. I don't assign confidence to it, so I'm not into the confidence
You haven't
here.
done introspection. Okay, cool.
Yep, haven't done any introspection. But I was telling you when I was in the middle of actually telling you what I think, as opposed to you doing the interrogation. I was actually saying those things. It is quite possible that we could be in a simulation. I have multiple ways that if you wanted to have the time and we could go through a thorough understanding of what I mean by that and what it is, we could. I don't want to do that. But I do hold the possibility that we could. And I want you to hear these things carefully. I do think that we could be in a simulation. I do think it's possible that there could be a civilization that had a million-year head start to us, and it'd be unfathomable to think about the level of artificial intelligence that could exist from some kind of alien life form. Andrew knows that I say that the only pathway to an actual God, it basically is keeping those two alive, is that God's an alien. God, by definition, isn't a human, so the idea that he would be an alien, I don't find to be very, wild and crazy. I think if you hold those things open, which I do, then sure, I'll grant you that could be the thing that people call God, but it doesn't give me any more understanding to solving a problem that our brain cannot solve. Is how could an Abrahamic God possibly be the first thing? What would be the impetus for something that has all the superpowers imaginable to just be the thing that there is when there's no evidence of anything like that ever having existed? And we just want to posit that it is, and it gave rise to everything. We're just kicking the can down the road because the next question is, how did that start?
Yeah, I agree. How could it possibly be
So
true?
you don't have to believe work because my brain doesn't work that way.
That's why I'm an atheist, because I think it's incredibly unlikely.
I've heard your stances, and I know you're an atheist. I've heard you multiple times speak on this. We've been in rooms scores of times together. I understand your point.
Unless you changed your name, I don't think we have. Did you use something else?
No, I think maybe you did. I've been in rooms of times.
And you were always called Pro?
I was always called Pro, yes.
Sorry, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I usually was doing a lot of the listening. But there is no way to get past that. For any level of intelligence, it's the end of the story, because we can't answer that question. But to say, I believe that's a thing, you have to be honest.
I have a question. Maybe this is for Frenchie. Frenchie, will you take a question?
Yeah, I will. I'm happy to answer any question.
While you were talking, you triggered a thought. I appreciate this notion, like a lot of people, belly navel gazing about whether there is a God or not a God. Now, it seems to me that is a question that kind of belongs in an 18th or 16th century European isolated time frame, because it implies that there are two choices, God or not God. And it seems to me that in a modern age where we have airplanes flying to every corner of the globe and a full catalog of human religious expression, that the question is sort of like, are there 10,000 gods, or are people just making up this shit? And this question, like, is there a God or not a God, just seems really archaic to me. And do you feel that, or do you think it's still relevant today?
I think it's probably more accurate to say, as an atheist, you believe there are no God or gods. You could just say gods, if that makes more sense to you, if that's your question. We typically just shorthand it to God because we live in a culture that has Abrahamic single gods versus, we don't all live in India where there's thousands of gods. But if we did, we would say, I don't believe in gods.
Well, no, I grant that. So you're kind of agreeing with me, right?
I guess.
A cultural. Yeah. This is a cultural vestige advantage of a 16th century conversation, which is highly rooted in the singular God. But to me, the way I resolve this is I say, I believe there are 10,000 gods. I just believe that every single one of those 10,000 gods is some fanciful imagination that somebody farted out of their ass.
We farted it out, yep. Now, real quick, Frenchie, the agnosticism thing that I was trying to point out, and hopefully you'll see what I'm saying here. So, agnosticism has a burden. It most likely is going to have, certainly in the Western context, where you have people that are familiar with hearing the Kalam and the fine-tuning and all these different arguments that have been around for centuries, and different formulations of them, popular apologetics, Frank Turek and William Lane Craig, and all these people, right? Because Christians certainly want to get their message out, right? So the chances are you're going to be, you have been exposed to it. Conversely, you've been exposed to the problem of evil. Most people thought, if God exists, why am I suffering? Why is it, So you have these different reasons for and against the belief in God that have been presented to you. And you do have some burden. I'm not saying this to you, friend. I'm just saying if you understand where I'm coming from here. You do have some burden, unless you're like some kid that was raised by wolves and didn't have any exposure to apologetics or anybody that are anti-apologetics. Unless you, and sorry, Jason, I was just getting ready to say, can somebody bring up Jason? I meant to say that a second ago. Unless you've been exposed to, unless you haven't been exposed to those things, you're going to need to get hound as to why these particular reasons don't persuade you, right? So, in other words, somebody could be like, hey, the Kalam, I think, does show God exists. And you say, well, it doesn't for X, Y, and Z reasons, right? You're going to say, well, premise 1, I don't agree with that, or premise 2, and that's why it doesn't bring me to God. These deductive arguments, right? So, or whatever it is, the deductive versions of these arguments. It's like, well, I don't come to God's existence because I get off the train somewhere, right? And so that means you do have a burden, unless you're what's called, you have invincible ignorance. Like you don't know about any of these arguments. You haven't had the chance to survey them back and forth, to consider them, deliberate back and forth. If you haven't had any of that, then you could just be like, okay, I'm invincibly agnostic, and I don't have a burden. But agnosticism in and of itself doesn't get you off the hook. And I was trying to say to Pro that agnosticism, even want to say that it is the position, it's a psychological state decided, or you can say, I don't know if there's a God either way. You still are going to have beliefs surrounding that, and that you're going to have beliefs, namely, theism, and the arguments for theism don't work.
I'm not persuaded by your not persuaded thing. Me being not persuaded isn't the same as a burden of proof, and I feel like you're shifting the burden to me. If somebody just comes up to you and wants to argue that God exists because of the Kalam, the burden's on that person, as it always is in any kind of scientific room, making the positive claim to support the premise. I don't need alternative cosmology to say I don't think the argument succeeds.
I agree with you.
Yeah, but just like if somebody says the defendant's guilty, thing that we were talking about earlier, a jury doesn't need to solve the crime to say the evidence hasn't convinced me. I can just reject the argument. It's not the same thing as proving the opposite.
Well,
Do you mean agnostic atheists have a burden? Because I think a true agnostic would just say, look, I think there's good arguments on both sides, and I just don't have
that's fine.
But agnostic atheists, of course they have.
What I mean is dialectically, Frenchie, there is something about, and Piper's good at bringing this out, but there is something about in a dialogue with somebody.
I would like to hear it.
Just taking an agnostic position doesn't therefore mean that you shouldn't have something to be.
Yes, it does. Just because I'm exposed to all kinds of stupid ideas all the time, right? Exposure doesn't create obligation for me. Like you're saying, I've heard the arguments, therefore I owe an explanation. Why? Not necessarily. I've heard in this room arguments for flat Earth, the homeopathic stuff and astrology and all this stuff. Just because you have an argument doesn't give me some kind of burden. In fact, I don't do it. I don't go debate flat earthers for that reason. I actually listen to them and tell them why they're being dumb on certain things. But I'm never in there trying to prove the Earth is a sphere. why stop at Christianity, Andrew? Like if the exposures create some kind of burden, then all you Christians have a burden too. Because have you studied the Quran? Have you studied the Hindu metaphysics, the theism,
a
and
reason why we don't believe those, or why we think that we don't have to.
Why? Okay, so we could do that, right? But it's weird to do that across the board for everything and say, well, I need this person to give me a reason for not doing it. But why?
Only, notice what I said though, bro. Only if you've been
Love doesn't
exposed
get you far, bro.
Only if you've been exposed to it. If you haven't been exposed to it, then obviously it's not reasonable to say somebody in somebody's remember when I said invincible ignorance, right? So if somebody had invincible ignorance, meaning they haven't had exposure to any of the arguments for a particular proposition.
Cause exists in Christianity is true. This is what I try to say to all the morons who do this stuff. An agnostic can simply walk up and say, hey, I might grant you a first cause and still not be convinced of your Christianity, right? So agnosticism can be the default. Imagine like you, again, I'm sorry to go to the math things, but you get a jar of jelly beans, right? And someone says the number's even, and then I just go, I'm not convinced. You don't suddenly acquire a burden to explain the exact number just because you said I'm not convinced, right? It's like God exists. I can just say I don't know without that becoming some kind of competing theory.
Also the case that you're not convinced that God doesn't exist. That you're not convinced that God doesn't exist.
Oh, I guess she's asking you. Right?
Okay. Oh, I didn't hear what.
Is it the case that you're not convinced that there is no God?
Wait, there's double negative there. I'm not convinced.
I know. You're not convinced that God exists. You've said that loads of times. But are you also not convinced that God doesn't exist?
Yeah, I'm not convinced that God doesn't exist.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. You just seem pretty sure. When you
No, I
give that
seem pretty sure. I
enormously
seem
long
pretty
spiel
sure.
about why religion was rubbish.
You're doing
and
a longer spiel telling me about my spiel every
I
time.
sat through
Succinctly,
it.
I tell you what it is.
I
There
heard
is
it.
no succinct way for your brain to make sense. Don't, oh my God, you jumped in the middle of it, and I'm just telling you again what I said, and you're asking why I don't understand. Why you want to say it again, that you don't understand what I very clearly said. Tell me how you make sense of it. As an atheist, tell me how you make sense of it.
My point is simply this. You gave a lot of reasons that seem to indicate you think this is a load of bullshit.
I think your definition of the Abrahamic religions are bullshit. What aren't you understanding? That there could still be a God.
Okay, so you are an atheist to the Abrahamic God, right?
Yeah, you're an atheist to every God you believe in. If you're a Christian, you're an atheist to Hindus. Yeah, but then we don't use that word. That's a silly way to say it.
I think you're just hiding behind the label quite far.
No, I don't like the label because I don't have belief in
No, you're hiding
anything.
behind the
I don't have belief.
Here, we are living here, super dog.
Don't hold your God exists. You don't believe that God exists, is that right? You don't hold. I'm just trying to.
I do not hold the belief that God exists. No.
So technically, that would mean you don't. Yeah, so you don't.
There's a reason why. There's a reason why that she's saying I'm hiding.
Ignore Frenchie, she's a moron.
It's bastardized and corrupted, and only for. No, I'm withholding saying atheist for a reason because nobody uses that word for anything else but religion.
Yeah.
No, not religion. God.
You don't believe.
Yeah,
believe
God.
that you don't believe that God exists, but you don't know it exists.
No, it's slightly different than that. The nuance I think is important, don't you? Do you think I don't have any reason to actively believe that God exists, but if there were certain evidence, I think there's a pathway that I can say it exists, but that evidence doesn't exist.
Can I offer a comment?
That makes sense. We just have to check your boxes.
Just to make a little
I think that's
just
just
to make a little
an
bit of peace.
agnostic atheist.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, I think it is.
That's somebody who's that's somebody who's taking the scientific process
No, Marshall, that's what it
I
is.
really
That's somebody who's taking the scientific process and saying just give me a second. They're taking the scientific process and they're saying if logical questions are answered and they can be answered satisfactorily, he might believe. But as of this point, nobody who happens to believe in a god or the gods has given him any scientific explanation that makes any bit of sense with logic. That's what he's saying. Those two aren't in competition.
I just want to try to make some peace here. I think there's peace. I think I think maybe you were not aware of a long conversation that happened between people like Richard Dawkins on the topic of the word atheist. And there's just a claim by a lot of leading atheists that the word does not make sense in the absolute. And if the only people who are atheists, if it only applies to this narrow, tiny sliver of people who can somehow express total confidence in the absence of God. But I think it more generally is like the third